basics of just like what is arc play, what is positioning, some stuff that, Coach Damon's gone through, whether it be articles or seminars before. And then I'm going to kind of talk a little bit more about how we're seeing some of the top goalies weaponize it, how they can use it to their advantage, and then how you guys can incorporate that into your game, or if you're a coach, how you can incorporate that into your goalies' games. So the first thing, who am I? So my name is Drake Porter. He gave me the big intro there. I don't need to run through a lot of it, but I'm the head of high school development for Goalie Smith. I just recently signed with the Atlas Lacrosse Club, so I'm super pumped to be playing with those guys in February at the Sixes Championship Series. Graduated from Syracuse in 2022. I'm also currently a graduate assistant at Messiah University, which is a Division III school in Pennsylvania, where I'm also studying to get my master's. I'm a firm believer in reps greater than, which is basically reps greater than everything. And what I mean by that is I'm not saying all other drills are stupid. That's exactly the opposite of what I'm saying, but I think all drills are supplemental to the best version of training, which is going out and seeing shots in your gear. Not necessarily shots with hard balls, not necessarily having guys or girls crank shots on you, but getting out, being in your gear, being in the goal. Just like Tom Brady in the offseason, he always talks about his best version of training is getting out, strapping the pads on, and throwing to his receivers. I think it's similar in lacrosse. And then my last thing I like to talk about is just don't chase perfection, chase saves. You know what? Saving the ball is really important, and I think anything that you can incorporate that helps you save the ball, you should try to do it. And if it doesn't help you save the ball, don't worry about it. Maybe that kind of training piece isn't for you. So that's sort of just who I am, a little bit of my philosophy when it comes to training goalies. And I'll kind of get right into, like I mentioned, goalies arc, the basics. So as you get into an arc, this is really just talking about where a goalie is positioning himself or herself in the cage as the ball moves around. So the first and most traditional is the 5-step arc. The ball is over on a lower angle, you're on the pipe, up to this 45-degree angle, you're sort of in between the pipe and the middle, up to the ball's in the middle of the field, you're top middle, and again, same thing on the other side. So this is the most traditional sort of basic way to play goalie. Honestly, the thing I like to say is if you threw a goalie in and said he never played before, or she never played before, and said figure it out, this is probably what you would go to. This is the most natural. So I'm just going to play a couple clips of Kyle Bernlohr, who just sort of plays that traditional arc. He's about 5'11". He's right in that mid-range in terms of size. So I'll throw a couple pauses in here as he comes up. So you can see, right, shooters on a 45-degree angle. He splits off the pipe a little bit, positioning himself in between. He's active. He's moving around. This is sort of a guy who plays your traditional 5-step arc. Feet are always square to the shooter, et cetera, et cetera. So this is, sort of the classic way to play lacrosse goalie. Then you can get into something that I saw a lot more of as I started training guys through Goalie Smith, and that's the 3-step arc, aka the low arc or the flat arc. So this is something that a lot of bigger goalies will do. The reason being, so you really have 3 steps. You're either on the pipe with your left foot, you're in the middle of the goal, or you're on the other pipe. And this is something with goalies with wide stances or bigger goalies tend to play a lot more of. But in general, playing lower or flatter gives you a little bit more time to react to the ball, but you're not necessarily taking up as much of the cage. So a guy who plays this arc, not necessarily the perfect flat arc, he's a little bit higher, but a good example at least is Jack Kincannon, who's about 6'4", now my teammate, but he plays for the Atlas. And you can see here as I slow this down, or I pause it, so this shot's coming from that same 45-degree angle, but he's so big he can afford to have his left foot on that pipe, his right foot a little bit flatter. So you can see he's playing more of like a lower, flatter arc. Because he's a bigger guy, this gives him a little bit more time to react. And it's just something you can do when you're a little bit taller. So that's the 3-step arc. As I keep quick through here. Then there is the most rare arc of all, and I'll kind of talk about why it's rare. And borderline doesn't really exist, but that's the 7-step arc, aka the high arc. So this is basically, running around similar to the 5-step. You're keeping your feet square, but you're playing way up at the top of the crease. The reason you would want to do this is you're a guy who likes to cut off angle. Maybe you're a smaller guy, but you want to take up as much of the cage as possible, or you're a girl who wants to take up as much of the cage as possible. As we go through, I'll show you a few clips of Dylan Ward kind of up on his high arc. But again, I'll talk a little bit further about some of the misconceptions about this type of arc. But as you can see, he's way up. He's playing around the top, whereas the last 2 guys were down here. Pretty great clip. Dylan Ward, also a good friend of mine, helped train me in high school. Great dude. But now we're going to talk about, so I've talked about the three. And now we're going to get into dynamic arc play. So this is what I would say is where we're sort of heading to and where we're seeing goalies play a lot. So I've given you three base arcs. You probably want to make sure it's either flat or traditional, but you establish a base arc. Before you can walk, you have to run. Establish how you play, and you can master it. So for me, it was always just the 5-step arc. That's where I felt comfortable, making sure I was always in position, feet were square to the shooter. That is the basics. You want to make sure you have that down. Once you have that down, you can be willing to play around with it. Do not define yourself as a low arc guy or girl, and use your positioning as a weapon. So that's sort of the basics of what I mean when I'm going to talk about dynamic arc play a little bit here. So things to know. Walk before you can run. I mentioned it. To weaponize your arc, you must first master the basics of the positioning. So moving from a low to a high arc. Once mastered, you can begin to shift between arcs. So I listed those three there. There's nothing out there that says you have to be a low arc goalie. You have to be a high arc goalie. You have to be a mid arc, and then you have to stay there. There's nothing that says that. I mentioned a few different situations where, if you're a bigger guy, maybe you want to go to the lower arc, and potentially there are situations where you can pop up and make more saves. There's nothing that says you can't do both, depending on the situation. The last thing I'm going to talk about that kind of ties into this is something that we call positional baiting, or I like to call it dictating a shooter. So changing your position from oftentimes shading to your stick side is another example of weaponizing your position to mess with shooters. So I'll kind of continue on here. So this is an example of Dylan Ward playing a dynamic arc. So you'll see, and this is like, I'm actually going to make sure I get this so I can go full screen after this little ad plays here. I'm going to turn my ad blocker on next time. But as we go through, you can see, so Dylan Ward, I mentioned how he was playing that higher arc before, but I want you to notice as a lead up, he's down on what you would probably call a low or flat arc, or at the very least a mid arc, right? Like we talked about before. And now watch what happens as we go here. As the shooter is winding up, he steps up and puts himself in that high arc spot, right? So he's not just sitting there playing a high arc 100% of the time. He's dynamically shifting between, I'll let the clip play here, he's on his low arc figuring out where the ball is. Now he pops up because this is a situation where it benefits him to be in a high arc. So let's kind of let it continue playing. You see that replay in the low corner here, right? As we get in, we see some more clips of Wardo playing. He's again, low arc, low arc, low arc, figuring out where the ball is. Pops up again, plays the high arc, makes the save, right? It's not running around the goal on that high arc. It's picking and choosing those times where it makes sense. Here, he pretty much stays on that low arc, maybe switches to a mid, and now he's making the save. So this is one of the best goalies in the world, right? Dylan Ward just won a championship with the Water Dogs, and he's not keeping himself stuck in that kind of, high arc all the time mindset. He's switching back and forth, which is, exactly what we want to start to try to do. Another example of what I would call a dynamic arc is this clip right here of Blaze. So Blaze, let me get it up to 109. So Blaze traditionally is sitting down, playing a little bit lower to the goal line, right? You can see he's probably what I would call a flat arc, bigger guy. Situations present itself right there, he stays low, right? And then this next spot, you're going to see this situation has presented itself, and he decides he's going to step up, reestablish his footing at the top of the arc, and try to make the save there. So you'll notice that these goalies, these two, you can argue the two best goalies in the world, probably going to be the USA and Canada goalie next summer, are shifting and moving around in between arcs. They're not just, I'm a high arc guy. They're not just, I'm a low arc guy. Ward probably uses the high arc more than Blaze does, right? And Blaze is probably sitting a little bit lower more than Ward does, but they're both shifting around in between. So sort of a cool piece and really good examples, the best in the world, messing around with their arc play. Within that, let's get into the positional baiting that I was talking about a little bit, and I mentioned it's often shading to that stick side. So we have Kyle Bernlohr here in the, and I'll get to the middle angle because this is the best, in the PLL goalie shoot-around. So these guys are Basically, it's 2 pointers, top middle. They get the whole net to work with. And Kyle Bernlohr is in the goal trying to just basically save wide open step downs. So you'll notice Kyle Bernlohr does not put himself in the middle of the goal and just say, I'm going to sit and react. What he's doing is he's shading a little bit to this side and giving up more to his stick side. I mean, this doesn't always have to be the case. If you feel where if you make a lot more saves to your opposite side, you can make them shoot there. A lot of times, this is when goalies, when you're in a spot where they have a really high percentage look, this is a way to mess with the shooter or play to your strengths, right? Kyle Bernlohr is really, really strong doing the stick side. So he's going to make guys shoot there and basically make them shoot the ball at a strength of his. So maybe that one goes in. That's okay, right? Nobody's perfect. Does it again. Boom. This is the cage. And I think the magic of doing this as well is as these shooters get going, maybe, right, he's shading a little bit over to this side. Maybe his plan was to try to hammer this low corner here. But Bernlohr has put himself in a spot where he's taking that away. He's saying, you know what, if you're going to score me, you're going to score somewhere else. So what he's doing is taking back a little bit of control from the shooter where you can start messing with that shooter a little bit, right? Like, I'm not going to let you get exactly what you want. You're going to play by my rules, and it gives back a little bit of control. And then if they shoot it to that side anyways, you can make an awesome off-stick side high save like Kyle Bernlohr did there. Again, one of the best in the world. So things to keep in mind. So the high arc, so what I talked about is shifting up to that high arc, is at its best when a shooter is on a lower angle and stationary. It can be really tough to regain positioning if the shooter hitches or if there's a pass. So, tying into that, let's go back all the way, and let's look at Ward and when he decided to whip out that high arc. So, the ball's across the field. This is Paul Rabel here, is on a lower angle, right? And he's in a spot where he basically cannot move and go on the run. He has to shoot this ball. He's wide open across the field. He's got to take this shot. Ball comes across. Ward understands that, steps up, and now Paul has nothing to shoot at as he's looking at the cage, right? Ward is taking up the full cage. So this is a spot where it's a 7-yard step down, but positionally, right, we have less cage we have to worry about covering. So I can pop up, give him nothing to shoot at, and then once I'm up there, right, it's important to remember that I don't need to step as much as I would have to otherwise, right? So let's say he plays this slide at the goal line. He's got more cage to carry up, right? Let's go back to all the way to Mr. Bernlohr, right? We get to the middle here. Look at all that cage he has to take up, right? Versus when we go back all the way to D. Ward here, right? This ball comes across, it's on this low angle, it's still moving really fast, right? But he doesn't have nearly as much cage he has to take up. So by stepping up the field, he's giving Rabel nothing to look at. So that's important to remember that is a time when you want to do it. What you don't want to do, and we'll get all the way back to where we just were, what you don't want to do, right, and I pulled this clip up here. I want to preface this by saying, Dylan Ward, I shouldn't have to say it, but he's, in my opinion, the best goalie in the world, just won a championship with the Waterhawks, but it's not always perfect stepping up to this high arc. There's situations where it doesn't make as much sense. Dylan Ward recognizes he thinks that this guy has to shoot this ball. He steps up to that high arc, right? But this is a situation where he probably doesn't want to do it because this pass can get off. And now because of that pass, he's got all this ground to cover. He has to get back into his positioning, which is really hard to do once you've gone up to that high arc. So, as a result, he ends up a little bit out of position, and they net an easy goal. Again, this is one goal of, where it doesn't work out of many times where it does, but it's important to remember that this probably isn't a situation, right, a spot where he could catch it and potentially pass, where you would want to be messing around too much with the high arc. So there's situations to do it, and there's situations you probably want to avoid it. So, really, as a summary, arc play as a tool. So getting up and playing that high arc, right? It makes you harder to scout. I think this is really important with goalies once you get older, once you get into those college ranks. If you ask anyone, any shooter in the league, what do you think about Dylan Ward as a goalie? The first thing they'll tell you is, oh man, it's that high arc, that freaks me out. But like I said, he doesn't do it all the time. But because he does it sometimes, it's in every single shooter's head, right? So now you're making a scouting report for the guy, and you've got to add that as a whole other section. Maryland lacrosse makes, I shouldn't know this, but there's a leak in the building, and I know they make 2-page scouting reports for all their goalies they play. I'm just kidding. That's like public information. But they make 2-page scouting reports for all the goalies they play. And I guarantee you, if you're a goalie and you whip out a high arc 3 times and the shooters all miss, it doesn't even matter. The game before, that's going to be a whole paragraph in the Maryland scouting report. What to do if he hits the high arc, right? So it's something that you can whip out. And then again, it could surprise shooters. So obviously it's great positioning-wise. It's awesome to step up, take up that, you're taking up more goal. They have less to shoot at. You're going to make more saves. But more than anything else, it can freak a shooter out a little bit, right? Maybe they were planning on going for that low corner. You jump out at them, and now they're like, whoa, what do I do now, right? So it makes them hesitate on a shot where, again, Paul Rabel has that 7-yard step down. That should be automatic for him, but now he's thinking a little bit about it. Again, it gives you control back if you're struggling. And I mentioned that before, Kyle Bernlohr, and that's more the positional side to side, right? But you have a shot where the shooter's got all the control in the world. They're shooting from 7 yards, right? It's a really good look. If I pop out on a high arc, right, and I'm freaking him out, I'm back in control. I'm making him do what I want. If I go to one side and I shade a little bit, right? And again, you'll notice that Bernlohr didn't go all the way over to the pipe, but he shaded a little bit. And he said, if you're going to score, you're going to score to my stick. Right? He's taking back a little bit of control. So if you're struggling and you're in a game where you're like, man, these girls are lighting me up. I don't know what to do. One way you could get a little bit of confidence back is maybe you step up on that hard. Maybe they miss the cage. Maybe they shoot it, and they actually score. Maybe you shade a little bit. You want them to shoot at your stick, and they score to your stick. But you've got a little bit of control back because now you're like, okay, you're playing by my rules. You're playing how I want, right? So just like that, it can pull you out of a rut if you start shading. If you're scoring, you're going to my stick. Maybe they score a couple of them. Maybe you get a couple on your stick. Now your confidence is back, and you're back at. And then this is, the PLL did a little study called a Dukes percentage, which I thought was a kind of funny name for it. But basically, it's the value of a miss. So Dylan Ward had the highest Dukes percentage, and Blaze Reardon, where the shooter had a high percentage look and then missed the net, right? There's a shot clock now at pretty much every level. So if you can force a miss by stepping up and maybe freaking a shooter out or taking away the shot the shooter likes, that's basically 10 seconds off the shot clock because they have to go behind, pick up a ball off the end line, and there's value in that. If they've got a high percentage look and they miss the net, it doesn't show up on the stat sheet, but there's value in them missing the cage, and there's value in you freaking them out and not giving them the shot that they want. So those sort of things that we've talked about, and this is a drill where you can mess around specifically with the arc play. So it's soft ball. So I really want to make sure everyone sees this here. Champion Sports PLW soft lacrosse practice ball. We have fully switched over to these for basically most things that are in that mid-range where we want to work on really hard shots, but then there's also the reality that we don't want to get hurt. So these balls, I would recommend getting them in white. But what they do is now instead of using a tennis ball, where the ball can curve a little bit, or where we know, okay, it's different, it's a little bit different. These balls look almost the exact same as a real lacrosse ball. They're just softer, and they don't hurt as much. So the value, and again, it's probably not advantageous for me because I'm the one who needs to clean the balls up, and I mix these balls up all the time. But that's a good thing because when I'm in cage, I don't realize when a softie's out versus a regular hard ball. So these are great training tool to work on shots where it's really, really difficult, or where if the shooter shoots full speed, you're worried about the goalie getting hurt. These balls are awesome to get rid of that. So you can buy a pack of these. It's $25, best $25 you'll ever spend. You can get a pack, take them out to a field, and you can either go to the low wing, or you can turn the goal on an angle and have it go up against the backdrop. But that same angle I showed you earlier, where Dylan Ward, he was stepping up, but that net was angled behind him and there wasn't much to shoot at, right? And you can just have a shooter tee off, have a pile of balls 10 yards up, and have a shooter tee off from 10 yards up. And then as a goalie, you can get creative. Maybe I shade side to side. Maybe I step up on that high arc. Maybe I test out a low arc, right? I see what I like. But because you're working on that angle, I would never recommend a goalie really try out the high arc if the shooter's top middle. Because you're not taking up the full cage anymore, right? That's probably where you want to shade a little bit more side to side, and we'll get into that later, right? But at the high arc, the best time to try it out is on an angle. And like I said before, one thing you want to avoid, you don't need to step as much. So if you pop out to that high arc, it becomes a small, choppier movement versus stepping all the way. Because what you're doing when you take that big step is you leave a lot of goal behind you. So as you try this out, if you ever try this drill, make sure you're not stepping up and taking those big, big steps and leaving open goal behind you. If you move one direction and the ball goes another and the ball gets into a spot where had you stood still, you would have stopped it, that's something to keep in mind as you're training, and that's something to look for as you try out this drill. So I know I'm throwing a ton at you guys about sort of the arc play. You can tell I get pretty excited about it. What other drills can I do? So some of these are going to be, so wing to wing. So you can, again, same angle. If you have two shooters, you can have the shooters pass wing to wing, use those softballs again, and work on having to step across the field. So they pass from one low wing to the other low wing. Same skip pass that you saw Rabel shoot on Dylan Wardoff earlier. And you can work on popping up to the high arc and maintaining balance, not falling forward, which I'll get into in a little bit. So that's a good one. You can go wing to wing. You can do the alleys. What I mean by alleys is, let's say, this big square here is the field. Right here's the goal. They're going to run down the side. So that's an alley dodge where they run down the side. And again, positioning is key. You can shade to the near side. You can try to make them shoot at your stick. Try to make them shoot at the off stick. Sweeps. This is when a shooter's running across the top. This probably isn't a time where, as I mentioned before, if they can move around, not the time probably for the high arc, because all it takes is 2 steps for them, and they've got most of the net to look at behind you, right? So you want to make sure that they're still while you do it. So you can do alleys or sweeps. They run across the top. Now's the time where you might want to shade to one side of the goal versus the other. Not the time for the high arc. Up the hash, this is an awesome time. So this is when shooters are running up the field. Their heads are turned. They jump back. Think Rob Pennell coming up from behind the goal. This is an awesome time where you can do either. You can either shade a little bit to one side, right, positional baiting, or as they turn their head, you can step up, jump them on that high arc. Again, you talk about messing with the shooter. Up the hash, the shooter's head is turned. They turn around, and all of a sudden you're 5 feet higher than you were before. That's going to freak them out a little bit, right, and make them second guess. Maybe I was going to shoot for that corner, but I've got nothing to shoot on there. Now I've got to fix my shot. Oh, falls out of bounds. Right, and you win. Your team wins. As you go, focus on messing with your arc and positioning. Find what you love and they hate. As you do this stuff, there will be things that you love, and there will be things that you absolutely hate, and you're like, that is not for me, right? Like maybe you are just trying to do positional baiting. You're trying to make people shoot at your stick, and you're not making the saves. But maybe you try the other way, you make people shoot at your off stick, and you love it because it just feels like such a natural movement for you, right? And maybe that's your game. Not everyone is going to be the same. Maybe you love popping up to the high arc when a shooter's head is turned and they're running up the field, but you hate doing it when they're in a step down situation. Again, you're going to have to figure out what you love, and then at the same time, figure out what messes with the shooters, right? When you are shooting around with someone and they keep going wing to wing and you jump up randomly, right, and they say, oh, I hate that, right, that's probably a good thing. It's probably a sign that you should keep doing it. As we go through here, I'm actually going to stop the screen share, and I'm going to talk about a couple different concepts within this. Is there any way I can go full screen on my camera?
There is. Yeah, you got it right there. While we got a little break here, if you guys have questions, I forgot to mention this. There's a Q&A box. Drop them in the Q&A box. We'll get to as many as we can at the end. And also, you can upvote the questions. So if someone's already asked the exact question that you want to ask, just thumbs up that one. It'll rise to the top, and we'll make sure we get to that one. Drake, let's do it. Yeah, I think you're full screen mode now.
Okay, perfect. All right, so a couple things within this. So I tried to do it on video, but I find it's honestly easiest when I just get up and run around. So ignore my clothes in the background. But, okay, so as you step up to the high arc, as you go from, I'm on my mid-arc right here, I want to step up and mess with the shooter. What you need to avoid is stepping up and then losing your balance and falling forward. Because what happens is, if I'm falling forward now, I'm giving myself even less time to react, and I'm not stepping to the ball efficiently. So what I want to do is I have two options. I can either take a couple steps up like this, or if I want to do it even faster, I can take that hop step and then reset. But as I jump forward, I want to make sure when I land, my weight is on my heels so that my balance comes through and I'm here. Because if I land up on the front of my feet, I'll keep falling forward and I'm not in a good spot to make a save. So again, I want either two steps up, one big hop up, but I want to avoid that continuous falling forward. From here, I have another kind of small thing. We've been preaching for this. So you jump upfield, you have less time to react. That means it is really hard as a goalie in this situation, right? They're at 7 yards, they're cranking the ball. It's very difficult for me to get down and make this perfect save down here, getting my stick down low. In fact, if I think they're going low and I try to get everything with my stick, what happens is maybe I'm wrong. He goes low to high, and I've opened up all that goal on top of me where I have nothing, right? There's nothing to shoot at. So you'll notice what Dylan Ward did in that clip where he made that low save on Rabel, he did not make the save like this. He made the save and went like that and saved it with his legs. Same thing, you saw that clip where Blaze stepped up. He got down and saved it like this. He did not make that perfect save with his stick. So we've been calling it in situations like that where they're inside sort of 6 or 7 yards. It's really hard to get your stick all the way down. Hands high, feet low, right? So worry about everything up top is with my hands. Anything below my hips, I'm thinking feet first. And if I get a really good read on it, maybe then I'll go with my stick. But it'll prevent you from dipping. And then as soon as I'm here, there's nothing. But if I'm wrong up top, I got all my feet and my legs to be able to still make a save down low. So I know that's a little bit weird, but as you pop up to the high arc, I have less time to react. Boom, boom, and then anything up top, I can go for it with my hands. So we call that balance as you pop up to the high arc, and then hands high, feet low. If you're in a situation, not just the high arc, but if you're in a situation where they are cranking a shot, it's really close. I don't think I even have time to get my hands there anyways. Why not just keep my hands up top and everything down low? Worry about with my feet. Again, with that is training. You're going to hate it at first because we're trained to get down, catch everything with our stick. But it's training our feet. Okay, now I'm going to be able to use my feet. Watch the PLL. You'll see goalies all the time who even go for shots with their stick now because they're realizing that if they're worried about that, they're going to catch themselves dipping more. So Blaze, you watch a guy who's awesome, Blaze Reardon. He's looking at low shots, and he's popping down with his feet and with his legs. It takes training to get there, so keep that in mind as well. Don't get discouraged. You're trying to kick balls with your feet, and you're like, man, I'm really struggling. So I would say that those are two big pieces as well. Again, I know I've thrown a ton at you guys today, but I think that pretty much covers it. So I'm happy to answer any questions now.
All right, guys. Yeah, hey, get a sip of water. Get a sip of water. That was awesome, man. You get going, and I'm just loving it over here. A lot of great content right there. A lot of great content. Drake, do you find that, a lot of talk, when we start purposely using our legs to make those saves down low, I feel like the younger goalie's got to get padded up a little bit. Would you agree?
So I mentioned using the softballs for any type of drill where you're incorporating that more. I think that is like an awesome time if you're using those softballs, you're not going to be dealing with that pain down low.
That's true.
And, if you're also worried, if you're a younger goalie, also feel free to pad up. Especially, I joke with when I had goalies who came in and they trained, they said, I love playing the high arc. And then I'd shoot a low shot and they get hit in the leg and they'd, really complain. I'd be like, well, if you want to play a high arc, unfortunately, part of the reality is you're going to get hit more in your body. And especially down low, you're going to get hit in the legs. So it's probably not a bad idea to pad up again. The advantage, I would say, is of training with those softer balls, doing a drill like this, is you think about it, if you're repping it out, you're getting hit hundreds of times with those soft, low shots. You're getting hit hundreds of times with the legs. Use the softballs, not a huge effect. And then if you're just doing it in games or in practices, that's maybe 10 times you're getting hit a week, right? So there's a big difference between training with the hard balls, because if you're doing that, you're getting hit hundreds of times in the legs, and then you're probably never going to even want to use your legs down low when you get in a game. So training with those softies or padding up is also a good idea. I agree.
Yeah, and in the games, your adrenaline's running. I mean, I remember getting hit in the leg, crank shot in a game and not even feeling it, right? Because you just got so much adrenaline going. But in practice, it's not so. So, yeah, great points there. Michael wanted to know, when we talk about high school goalies that are smaller, or even youth goalies for that matter, does the dynamic arc, does it make sense still? We looked at Dylan Ward. Above the 6-foot crossbar. We looked at Blazer and above the 6-foot crossbar. If you're, 5'2", does it still make sense to do that dynamic arc and come out and play a little higher at times? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that is, if you had to draw it up, I would say that is the biggest advantage or biggest, time you would want to do it. The reason I say that is by stepping up, you're taking up more cage. And if you're smaller, you're already not taking up a ton of cage relative to, I'm not a super tall, I'm 5'11", right? I'm not taking up as much cage as, my 6'5" Team Canada counterpart or my 6'3" Team Canada counterpart, and it's Brett Dobson, Dylan Ward. But by stepping up, I've made up for a little bit of that, right? So I can step up a little bit, and now I'm taking up more of the cage. So even if I'm smaller, right, same thing applies. I step up, I'm now taking up more cage. And like I said, if you're stepping up and you're smaller, I can guarantee you they're probably throwing some more balls high, and that's where you can keep your stick up, try to gobble up everything high. And, unfortunately, you could still go down low with your stick, but I would recommend maybe using your feet, using your legs a little bit more.
Love it. Yeah, love it. 100% agree. Yeah, I think even as a smaller goalie, of which I am, I'm 5'8", right? So, you've got to make up for that lack of size by coming out a little bit and being a little bit bigger. And then you also move less, have to move less to reach a shot that's destined to the corner. But, yeah, great question. I'm going to try and answer all the questions about arc, about arc play, and then we'll hit as many as we can that are a little bit about other topics. Bob wanted to know, is there a specific arc you recommend for a goalie that has tracking issues to help them improve their tracking skills?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I again, you want to be able to kind of shift and play between each. But if you're someone who really struggles to track the ball and you want to play to the best of your ability, your probable best move, right? Let's say you're not afraid of the ball, you're not afraid of getting hit, but you struggle tracking it on outside shots. What you can do, and one thing that Dylan Ward told me was part of the reason he plays the high arc is because seeing the ball, because he played so much indoor, he's not used to seeing the ball for so long on deep shots. So he would rather just step up and turn it into a 10-yard shot where he's just snapping and reacting. Right, he's flopping and throwing a leg out like he's back in the box. So if you think about it, if you're a goalie who struggles with the ball, what you could do if you pop out to that high arc a little bit more, now you're turning it a little less into, okay, outside shot, I've got to make sure I'm tracking it, seeing it the whole way, to, okay, he's not as good of a tracker, but he's really good positionally. If he can work on not necessarily always playing it, but popping up to that high arc, it'll give him less time to have to track the ball. And now you're getting into more of the positioning and the angles game. But I would say this, if you're not willing to, or not willing, but if you're not the best at tracking the ball, you can make up for it with the positioning and angles, but you got to be willing to get hit a little bit too. Especially down low with the legs and with the hands. That's part of the reality of, if you want to play the high arc, watch Dylan Ward play, watch Blaze play, they get hit. And it's an awesome thing for your teammates, and you don't have to do it every day in practice, or you can use softballs to train, but if you're not necessarily the best ball tracker, you could pop up and play that high arc more, but you might get hit a little bit more as well.
Love it. Bob, does that make sense? Hopefully Bob's still with us. Throw a thumbs up in the chat if you could. Next question is a very specific question Andrew Inch has. What type of arc should I use on a fast break?
A fast break, so let's say a shooter's coming in wide open. This is not the time to pop up to that high arc. So anytime the shooters are in a spot where they have time and they can move, right? Because, I mean, let's say this chair is the goal, and I pop up and I jump up to the high arc. That's great if you as the camera are stuck. But as soon as you take one step this way, now you have all that goal to look at. Does that make sense? So what you gain coming up on a high arc is great if they're stationary, but they take one step and they have all that goal to look at. Versus, right, if I'm down lower, they take one step, I'm still taking up a lot of the goal. So I would recommend that's a spot where I would recommend maybe that positional baiting. I'm going to shade over to this side, and you're going to have to beat me here, and I'll pop across. Or this side, you're going to have to beat me here, and I'll pop across. And if you shoot it right at me, I'll eat it. So sort of a quick explainer of, that's a time where I would definitely want to sit again and try to do more of that positional baiting versus popping up to that high arc. Because if a shooter can move, that's where they can catch you out of positioning and pop an easy one in. That's where you probably want to sit back and play a little bit more deep in the goal. But if they're stuck in one spot, that's where you can get out and really trap them.
Yeah, and the other thing too, and I think I've heard Dylan Ward say this, is, a lot of it is a feeling thing for him. Like we mentioned, there's certain times when you might want to come out, low angle shot is imminent. The guy's going to shoot, right? Based on his body language, very low probability he's going to pass, low angle, I'm coming out. But, as you get more and more reps and get more and more experience, you do start to develop a feel for these type of things of this would be a great situation, right? Right, Coach?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's one thing in all this stuff I'm talking about. This is stuff you want to train, but when you get to practice drills or the game day, you can't be thinking about it. Your goal is to do it so much in your training, you just have a great feel for this is the time to do it. Because if you're thinking, okay, maybe I'll go, the ball's in the goal. The game moves too fast. But if you train it, you're not even, like you mentioned, the feeling, right? Mm-hmm. We joke with our goalies all the time, is the best goalie, you have the best game in your life. Hey, everyone in this chat has had an awesome game. And if you got in the car after and your parents go, what were you just thinking? Like, what was your mindset going in? And you're like, I don't know. Like, I just blacked out. It all happened. Like, I blacked out and I just played really well. Like, we want to be playing in that state while incorporating this stuff. And that only happens through training and just familiarity with it. When Tom Brady goes and he recognizes and he sees a deep ball, he's not analyzing all these small parts. Okay, now I can throw that deep ball to his... When he's live in the game and it's moving that fast, he's stepping back, he sees Mike Evans, he throws the ball, right? And that's sort of the level you want to get to, but you just got to, develop and train so that it becomes natural. That makes sense.
Yeah, love it. Good question from Shane. So, do these arc principles apply to women's lacrosse? What do you think Coach Meg Taylor would say about this dynamic arc play?
Absolutely. They definitely apply. And I think the biggest thing that you see in women's lacrosse that we've talked about is the struggle is there's so much motion in women's lacrosse. You need to make sure that they're trapped in a spot. Because what you'll see in the college game, and it happens, it happens to the best goalies. It happened in Dylan Ward, I showed you. But like I said, you step up, they take one step around, free goal, right? There's so much motion that you probably can't incorporate it as much. But if the girls are in a spot where they have to shoot the ball, and they can't move around very much, they can't hit a hitch and go, they can't hit a move and move around you, that's an awesome time to do it. So I think it's great for the women's game. Again, it's just another type of for even an 8-meter, right? Maybe you don't want to go to the high arc, but I mentioned shifting to one side or shifting to the other. I had my girlfriend out. We were shooting the other day. There's a field right by us, and she was a defender in college, but I made her shoot 8 meters on me because I just wanted to see what it feels like, and it's really close. And I just found myself, I was like, I'm going to move over. I'm going to make her shoot at my stick because if she just gets to shoot at this whole net, this is really hard. So, or I'm going to move over here. I'm going to make her shoot back to my off stick because this is so difficult for me as a goalie. So I think that sort of positional side to side, right? Versus then when I jumped up on the high arc, she just started running in and just dumped it right past me because she knew that she could do that. So it was kind of funny that this happened. Humble brag that I have a girlfriend. Yeah. But it was funny that we did that. I wasn't really thinking about this presentation, but I would say, that 8-meter is a perfect example of more the positional type stuff.
Yeah, I've interviewed a lot of women's lacrosse goalies, and we talk about that 8-meter. Yeah, and it's especially if you know that the girl's going to rip it right from the 8, she's not gonna run in. That taking a step out or shading to one side can really start to get into those mind games, and you can give the goalie the advantage and not the shooter because you're right, it's close. Exactly. Couple questions about box and field. This is pretty much a field lacrosse goalie summit, but a couple folks were asking about, as a box goalie, does this concept of arc play apply as well? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say box goalie is, a lot of it comes down to positioning. It's similar to hockey, right, in terms of the padding and how much goal there is to shoot at. So for them, it really comes down to positioning. More so than it might in field. So when we talk about, them popping up to the high arc, taking up more of the goal, if you watch, I think Evan was putting it in the chat, but Dylan Ward, when he plays box, where he also won a championship, he pops up to that high arc and box all the time, right? Or he might give up a little bit more to one side. Now with box, because the goal is smaller, you're talking about inches, but this same exact stuff still applies. Obviously applied a little bit differently, but it all still applies.
Yeah, love it. Cool. I think that's the most of the art questions. Let's get to some general questions. We'll try to hit as many as we can. Abigail wanted to know, how do I read where the shooter is going to shoot?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of a loaded question, but I think you obviously have the shoulders. Every goal is a little bit different. You'll hear some goalies who are all about I look for the ball in the stick. Other goalies will say, I just kind of look at their whole body, and it gives me a little tell, and I don't really think about it. The ball comes out. And other goalies will tell you, look at the eyes. I don't think there's necessarily one right answer there, because I've heard some awesome goalies have completely different theories. But in terms of if you really want to figure out where that ball is going, watch the shooter pass the ball. So we talk about hips, eyes, and shoulders. If their shoulders dip, the ball's probably going low. Right? If they're up here, it's probably going high. That's the basics, right? Maybe the elbow, too. You can look at their eyes. But watch the shooters pass before the game as they go through their lines. And as you get older in lacrosse, you'll start to see it more. But if the ball sits in that stick and they go to pass, and let's say she has to pull it back here and then pop it out, like you see with some of these gate sticks nowadays, is you realize that stick has a little bit more width. So if she's pulling it up high, the ball might sit in the pocket as she's shooting and end up low. And then if she pulls it low and pulls it up, it's going to go high. So it's a little bit like the plane is going to move a little bit, and it's the same thing in men's lacrosse where, for example, looking at a guy like Ryan Brown, like you pretty much, you can watch some film of him, and you're going to see that the ball changes planes. If his stick is down low, it probably has to come up high, because his stick holds the ball a little bit more. You can see that when he's passing around before the game. Same with Lyle Thompson. Like the ball he doesn't have a lot of whip, so the ball kind of flows out of his stick. So he's a guy, when he puts his shoulders low and he shoots low, probably staying low. And that's why you'll see him shoot high to high a lot and low to low a lot. And it's not changing planes quite as much. So that's something you can I know we talk about elbows, shoulders, eyes, but you can also pay attention to how their sticks shoot as well.
Yeah, I love it. Great thorough answer. Yeah, I always like to look at the shoulders. That for me was, and sort of the stick movement. And if they want to do one of those ones where like they, point the shoulders down and it looks like it's going to go low and then they end up shooting high, like you got me. You're going to beat me on that. But that's a tough shot. It's a tough shot. So, love it. All right, Jason, I've always been amazing at my high shots, even mid shots, but I found being 6'3", 210, trouble with committing to low shots unless I move forward on a shot. What do you recommend I could do to help utilize that high arc as a weapon while being able to commit to those low shots without an issue?
Yeah, so again, like if you pop up to that high arc, your advantage with your size is you're going to have bigger legs, so you'll be able to, as you step up, right, there's going to be, if you drop to a knee, right, there's obviously less to shoot at, or if you kind of drop down like that, however you want to play it. I would say tied into this, one thing that we've noticed is taller guys who struggle down low, I've often been told, will get down lower in your stance, and it looks a lot like that. It's really uncomfortable. I hated trying to play in a super squat position. But what you can do is in your stance, if you're back, push your butt back so you're more like this, and now it's easier for me to fall down and get to that low shot versus having to drop everything like that, which is a really difficult, like I just fell even trying to do it right now. So you can move your chest forward in your stance, and you'll notice my stick's lower too. So if you're really struggling down low as a tall guy, I would recommend, you don't have to change anything else about your stance. Push your butt back, get your chest a little bit lower, and now it's easier for you to get down to those low shots. That's one change. I don't know if you guys noticed it. I don't even know if he noticed it, but Dylan Ward made a couple years ago, which he stepped up and he didn't change anything about his stance. His chest went a little bit more forward, and he started eating up low shots that he had been struggling with earlier in the season.
Love it. Love it. Question that just brought up from me. I don't know if anyone's asked this. If they have, we'll mark it off. But, when I watch the Goalie Smith stories, and you guys got these awesome goalies, like a lot of times you'll see goalies, go down to the butt on low shots. Kind of get that leg in the way and go down to the butt. At what point do you start, like if I'm a young goalie, and I'm like, yeah, I want to do that, right? At what point should I start to incorporate that into my game, do you think?
Yeah, it's kind of funny, like we talk about, there's the perfect way to make the save and there's how we want to do it. Like I was out seeing shots this morning. I got a little time where I don't need to be in the office at Messiah, or we didn't have a Goalie Smith thing this morning. So you ideally always want to end up in a spot where you're down, whether your knee is down, whatever it is, you want to get down, but you want to be able to have your head and chest over the ball so you can control it. And that doesn't involve your butt hitting the ground. The reality is if it's faster for you to just drop and maybe you go back a little bit and your butt ends up hitting the ground, at the end of the day, like that first thing I said, you got to chase saves more than anything else. So is it perfect? No. Am I going to try to, in my warm-up, be better? But when we throw the goalies into that goalie Smith environment and they've got, Truett Sunderland, top recruit, shooting on them, if they drop back to their butt but they're still making the save, at the end of the day, I'd rather they make the save. So it's I would say, yeah, it's not perfect. Ideally, I want to have my head and chest over the ball every time. But this morning, like some of the balls, it's just the only way I could go fast was when I fell back on my butt. So it's not perfect, but it kind of is what it is at that point. You got to make the save. So
chase saves, not perfection, right?
Exactly.
Alexis says, sometimes when I see an attacker bigger than me coming in, I get scared and I sort of hide by the pipe. And then I struggle getting back to the center and end up really out of position. How do I fix that?
I would say the high arc is one I talked about taking control back. But just like giving up a little bit more, like you mentioned hiding on the pipe, right? So maybe instead what you can do is just take a little hop step over to one side. And now you're like, okay, well, you're going to have to shoot here, and I've got you, and I'll step, and I'll make a big save, right? So a little bit of taking control back. You mentioned getting scared. Like, for me, sometimes if I'm in a spot where maybe I'm, like, just I'm not confident, right? And Dylan Ward talks about not confident, like stepping up. And maybe it's not stepping up to a crazy high arc, but hopping up a little bit and just showing, like, I'm not scared. I'm going to step up a little bit here. Can also be a mental thing as well. So maybe for you, just try taking, instead of a foot upfield, maybe you take like 2 inches up the field and you jump up a little bit. And sometimes it'll just make you feel a little bit more powerful when that big player's coming down.
Yeah, love it. And like you said, say something to yourself, like, bring it, let's go. Like a lot of it is mental, I think, and when you repeat sort of a positive mantra of like, come on, bring it, right? Then all of a sudden, like, even me just saying that now, I felt a little something, right? Like, let's go. I'm ready to make that save. I'm not feeling scared. So,
100%.
Right. Yeah, love it. Jason says, I'm a new goalie. How can I speed up my steps? Speed up stepping to the ball.
Speeding up steps, I would say, that's something where as many reps as you can get as possible is great. But also, one thing that we've noticed and sort of been talking about is as you step, what slows us down sometimes is if you try to step where your foot always ends up pointing forward every time, it can be really uncomfortable and not super fast. So as you step, don't be afraid of opening up your leg a little bit, right? As you watch all the pro goalies, they're stepping and their foot's ending up out on an angle, right? It doesn't need to be flat. You can still, if you're a goalie who loves to step on that 45 degree, like, many people argue about nowadays, right? If you want to step forward, that's great. But notice how my foot is still pointed out, and my hips are a little bit pointed out. I'm still square, right? But my foot, as I step, is pointing that way. That's one thing that can help too and make your steps feel a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more natural, more athletic, and a little bit quicker, hopefully, as well.
Yeah, love it. Chris Brown, what arc do you use? Drake, dynamic arc.
Yeah, definitely was like a mid-arc in college. And again, this is something that, because, I'm always learning, I've been trying to go and just even in the goalie Smith sessions, popping up, trying out those high arcs, and didn't get a ton of minutes, but when I was in Alabama this summer with Team Canada, ended up popping out to the high arc. I wasn't even, again, I didn't think I was ever going to do it in a game, and then just we were playing Japan. Guy ended up in a spot where it was a perfect time, and I didn't even think about it. I just popped up to the top of the crease and made a save with my leg. So again, like if you train it, you'll just kind of find yourself doing it in the game. And I would say, yeah, dynamic arc now, definitely I was a 5-step guy in college. You pull up the film.
Yeah, love it. Taylor Campbell, on a one-on-one doorstop save, would it be better to step up on a high arc to cut the angles off, or stay closer to the goal and react?
It all depends on the situation, as much as I hate to give that answer. But if the shooter's in a spot where they can't move, they're stationary, and let's say there's a defender closing out, they have to get the shot off. It's going to be an awesome time to pop up on the high arc, because now they have nothing. But let's say no defenders are around, and they're wide open. All it takes is one fake and a step, and they beat you if you're on that high arc. So if they're in a spot where they got nothing else they can do, I think that's an awesome thing. Give them nothing to shoot at. If they're in a spot where they have a couple options and they can put it around you if you step up, maybe you hold back and you just worry about taking up the cage, reading them and beating them.
Yeah. There's certain plays where when I was playing, what I love to do, when you saw like a crease attackman's back, right, and you knew like if they feed the crease, like he's gonna catch and turn and shoot, just based on the play, right? There's no time to throw a fake because the guys are gonna crash on him. In that situation, when I see that feed coming in, I love to come up and sort of surprise him because then he turns around, right, and he's like, whoa, this guy's right on top of me, and then just match sticks, and it's such an easier save.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's the situation where it would be awesome.
Yeah, exactly. So it is very situational. I think when you watch those, the Lax Goalie Rat save edits and kind of watch different goalies play, you'll start to see like, oh, that goalie just came up right here. What was the situation, right? And kind of take notes and then try that in your own game. But great question. Great question, Taylor. Thank you. Julia wanted to know, do you have any drills or tips to make you stop flinching?
I would say I mentioned the softballs, and I kind of showed those that you can buy on Amazon, but those are great. Like so I just broke my right thumb, and then a month later, my first practice back, or first time training again, I broke my left hand. So I was a little bit timid coming back, and then the softballs were an awesome way for me to kind of get back into it, because the last 2 times I was on the field, I broke the bone. So I was definitely like flinching more than I ever had in my whole life, because I never really had too many injuries before that related to a ball. So to get myself kind of back into it and out of that zone, I just had a friend take a bucket of softballs and just shot as hard as he could. And because they weren't soft, I just started reacting, and if it hit me, it was okay. I wasn't in pain. And then next thing I knew, when I hopped in and we were back to hard balls, I wasn't flinching anymore, and I was back to just kind of attacking the ball. So using those soft white balls can kind of mentally get you back into it, if you find yourself flinching a little bit.
Yeah, I like that. Drake, we'll have to get you hooked up with one of the sponsors. The Evan makes the thumb guards, the Guardian Gear splints. So we'll see if we can send you one.
And Warrior just came out with those big goalie gloves, the QS. They sent me a pair. I had them on this morning.
All right, there you go. They're a sponsor as well. Yeah, the new Nemi QS. We're giving away 5 pairs. It's gonna be awesome. Julia, great question. There's also a drill that I've done with really young goalies, right at the very beginning, where they're behind a chain link fence, and just seeing shots, right? And then, you're not going to get hit because it's going to hit the fence, but I'm now just able to relax and get used to that stick movement, right? Because sometimes it's just that